Okay, Boker Tov. Boker Tov on this fine morning, the 10th day of Kislev, which is actually a special day on the Chabad calendar. The second Chabad Rebbe, called the Mittel Rebbe, Reb Shalom Dov Ber of Chabad. He was the son of the founder of Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, was released from prison. He was put into a Russian prison based on a libel. In terms of his spreading of Judaism, etc. And today he was released from prison. So maybe we'll talk about that. But today's conversation is, as we say in the as we posted in the topic of today's conversation, which is love, a Torah perspective. And you could give way more than one class on this subject, but let us you got to start somewhere, and today we will share something related to the parsha, the Torah portion. We always like to do that, and we will go maybe from the portion of the Torah to maybe also some mystical teachings, Kabbalistic teachings on love, as well as some practical applications of love, I guess, versus hate. So let's do that. First, we start with a bracha. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Shehakol Nihiya Bidvaro. So, in last week's Torah portion, and in this week's Torah portion, we find and we are exposed and we live with a story in the Torah, which takes up both last week's and this week's Torah portion, that has love and hate in there together. And interestingly, I saw a write-up that scientists, neurologists, neuroscientists have studied and have seen that when studying love and hate and how the brain reacts to love and hate, that the same parts of the brain that somehow are stimulated, that act up in an MRI test when it came to love, the same parts of the brain also acted up when it came to hate. So that's interesting, and maybe we'll explore that, of how love and hate are both interrelated. So last week's Torah portion, we find that Jacob, as he's running away from his brother Esau, who hates him and wants to kill him, so Jacob meets his eventual wife, actually his first cousin. He meets Rachel, and they become the matriarch and patriarch of the Jewish people. So Jacob, running away from his wife, comes to a place called Haran, to a city called Haran. Over there, he is at the well. And at the well, as we find, interestingly enough, several of our Jewish leaders have met their shidduch, their prospective basherta. They've met their basherta. They've met their future spouse at a well. And interestingly enough, a well and water is connected to, Kabbalistically, mystically, is connected to love, to ahava, as we will explore. And over there, he meets Rachel. And he meets Rachel, and the Torah goes on to say that although Jacob marries both sisters, he marries Rachel and he marries Leah, and he marries the two maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah, nevertheless, the Torah goes on to say that Vayehav Yaakov es Rachel, that Yaakov loved Rachel. Kabbalah and Chassidus talks about this. Why is it that Yaakov loved Rachel specifically? We're not going to go into that right now, but we're going to use this as a sort of platform to explain a little bit the concept of love and the Torah perspective, and how and its practical applications, And this is based on a class by several individuals that I've either heard or learned, Rabbi Shlomo, Rabbi Paltiel, and others. And the word "I love you," the word "I love you" in general has, of course, various meanings. I love you, the way you say "I love you" to your mother has one meaning. The way I say "I love you" to your spouse has another meaning. The way I say "I love you" to your child has another meaning. The way I love ice cream has another meaning. The word "I love" in itself has various meanings. However, in Kabbalah Hasidus, the word ahava, Hasidus says, is related to the word ava. Ava means to want, to desire, to be attracted to yearn for, and so on. So the common denominator for all these things is that ahava is something that you want, that draws you towards. Now, interestingly enough, and we're going to get back to this, interestingly enough, we find that last week's Torah portion, we find the impact of love and the impact of sort of hate or rejection. We find them both in last week's Torah portion and in this week's Torah portion. So let's get to it. We find that when Yaakov is running away from his brother Esau, because his brother wanted to kill him, his parents told him, "We want you to leave." So the Medrash tells us, and this is alluded to in the Torah itself, in the actual writing of the Torah, but the Medrash and Rashi tells us that Esau sent his son Eliphaz. Esau had a son, his name was Eliphaz, and he sends his son Eliphaz to go ahead and to kill his brother. Eliphaz catches up to, I'm putting in the galaxy buds over here. Forgot to put it in the beginning because usually it enhances the sound. I hope that's the case. So Eliphaz catches up to Yaakov while Yaakov is on the road, and Eliphaz wants to sort of go ahead and kill his uncle. Imagine that. But he doesn't just go straight and kill him. He allows for Yaakov, his uncle, to have a dialogue, to have a discussion with him. And Yaakov, his uncle, says to him, "Look, you were sent here by your father, and you have a mitzvah, in quotes, to honor your father's instructions, but I have a suggestion of how you could fulfill your father's instructions and let me live." And that is that the Talmud has a statement that says, "Ani chashuv kemet," one who is totally in a state of total poverty is considered like dead. And therefore, why don't you go ahead and take all my possessions? And by doing so, it is as if you have killed me. It's like you killed me. And in this case, you will not have shed my blood, and you will have fulfilled your father's wishes. And Eliphaz accepted. Now here, interestingly enough, the Medrash uses the term that why did he accept? He accepted because Eliphaz grew up in, I'm gonna close the shade behind because I think it's affecting the cameras. I don't know if that's better or not. You could tell me with a thumbs up, a thumbs down, only a thumbs up if it's better. If it's not better, then just don't react. Okay, so Eliphaz goes ahead and he allows it, and Rashi says that the reason why Eliphaz accepted Yaakov's deal, Yaakov's plea, is because he grew up b'cheiko shel Yitzchak. He grew up in the lap of Isaac, of his grandfather, and because he grew up in the lap of his grandfather, so the love, the affection, the love that Isaac gave to his grandson softened Eliphaz up enough that he accepted Yaakov's plea and he allowed Yaakov to live. So here we see the impact of a Zaidi, of a grandpa, of a Saba. If you're a Bubby or a Zaidi, give us a thumbs up. That because as wicked as Eliphaz was, which he was wicked, by the way, he married, he had relations with his own daughter. His own daughter he had relations with and gave birth to Amalek. That's what Eliphaz was. He was far from Mr. Righteous. But nevertheless, the fact that his grandfather gave him that love and affection had impact on him, that he had a spark within him that allowed Yaakov to live. Had that not occurred, we wouldn't be here today. If Yaakov was not allowed to live by Eliphaz, the entire Jewish nation would not have come to be. It reminds me of a story that I heard talking about, and we all know this, of love and its impact for history, for generations. I heard a story that there was a Rosh Yeshiva. Rosh Yeshiva means a head of a yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva. And this Rosh Yeshiva, his name was Rabbi Yaakov Neumann. Rabbi Yaakov Neumann, or Neumann, that was his name. This Rabbi Yaakov was a Rosh Yeshiva, meaning he was the head of a yeshiva. And he was known for his love and affection for his students. He would start every class in Yiddish. He would say, "Tayere Kinderlach," my dear children. He always give me a thumbs up for Yiddish over here. So he said, "My Tayere Kinderlach," and so one day a student came to him and reported his concern about a fellow student. What was his concern about the fellow student? The concern about the fellow student was that he heard that the fellow student was going to the theater. Now you need to understand, culturally and sort of religiously, in the yeshiva in Israel, he was a Rosh Yeshiva in Petach Tikva. Theater is not a place for a yeshiva boy to be, and in the yeshivas, there's, because of its alien message to Jewish values, a yeshiva boy, it's one of the sort of the rules that if you're going to yeshiva, you accept certain guidelines, which is that you will not go to the theater. Going to the theater is a sign that you have that you're allowing yourself to go down a track which doesn't have, or could possibly not have, a good ending. And again, depending on the schools and the standards and how strict they are, but in this particular yeshiva, going to the theater was an absolute no-no, was an absolute violation of the yeshiva's policies, of the yeshiva's sort of moral standards, outlook, demonstration of where the boy is holding. And so this friend went over to Rabbi Yaakov and he said to him, so-and-so is going to the theater. Now, in certain yeshivot, that's grounds for being expelled. It's like taking drugs in other schools. So Rabbi Yaakov went ahead, he got his coat, and he took a taxi, or an Uber, which was a taxi in those days. He took a taxi, and he traveled to this theater that he was told where this yeshiva boy, one of his students, was going to. And he comes to the theater, and he waits because his student took a public transportation, took a bus, so he got there sooner than the yeshiva boy. The yeshiva boy, his student, gets off the bus and gets onto line to get into the theater, and to his shock and surprise and embarrassment, he sees the Rosh Yeshiva, who everybody loved and admired and respected, is standing there waiting for him. And he says, "Oh my goodness, forget it. It's over. Now my parents, it's done. I'm in major trouble." And to his surprise, Rabbi Yaakov goes over to him and he says, "Look, it's really cold outside. You're going to wait in line. There's quite a bit of a line until the theater opens. It's winter. It's cold. Here, I bought you a coat. Take my coat and put it on. I do not want you to catch a cold, to get sick, whatever, to be uncomfortable." And the student is absolutely, sort of refuses and says, "Rebbe, this is your coat. I'm not going to take it. What are you going to do? This is your coat." He says, "Don't worry. I have a taxi. I'm going back, but you have to stay here. Just take the coat. Stay warm." And he sensed the genuineness and the real care, which was the first priority of Reb Yaakov. And he accepted the coat, and he was in the theater, and he became very uncomfortable, not because he was hot, but really the love and the care that the Rosh Yeshiva demonstrated, that he himself, he could have sent somebody else, that he himself came and made sure that he should be warm, and he knew he was sincere, that he just could not stay there in the theater. He was just pulled by the love that the Rosh Yeshiva just gave to him. And he left the theater, he went back to yeshiva, and sort of fell back into line with his upbringing, rather than rejected, etc. So here, that's sort of a modern story of the power of love, the power of affection. And I want to contrast that with what the Torah and the Medrash tells us about Eliphaz. We spoke about Eliphaz. Eliphaz, who spared Yaakov because of the upbringing and the love that he had from his grandfather Isaac. His Timnah, who was his daughter and his wife, who gave birth to his son/grandson Amalek, we find that she, Timnah, approached Abraham and Isaac, and she wanted to convert into Judaism. And Abraham and Isaac rejected her. And commentaries talk about various reasons why they rejected her into conversion. Just in general, as a general rule, when someone wants to convert into Judaism, we try to do whatever we can to dissuade them. Every person was created, and they have a purpose, and they have a mission, and that's what you should embrace and do. There's a wonderful teachings from the Khatam Sofer. Khatam Sofer was the leading scholar about 200 years ago, a great scholar and rabbi, and respected in all circles of the diverse Jewish communities. And the Khatam Sofer has a wonderful insight. The Torah says when Moses is introduced to God for the first time, he is in front of the burning bush. God says to him, "Take off your shoes, because the place that you're standing upon is holy. Hamakom asher ata omed alav admat kodeshu." The place that you're standing is a holy place. The Khatam Sofer says that was a message that God is giving to each and every one of us. The place that you're standing upon is a holy place. Don't be accepting of what is your place in the world, what is your place in society. Be accepting and make the most of it and have the most impact. Hamakom sha'ata omed alav, the place that you're standing upon, whatever it might be, admat kodeshu, is a holy place. And it's for you to embrace, to accept, and to transform into even more greatness. So that's So we try to encourage each and every one to be who they are in the most productive way. So, but Timnah was rejected. She was rejected by Abraham and Isaac. And even though commentaries tell us that they were justified, but nevertheless, Abraham and Isaac are critiqued or criticized for what appears to be, I want to modify it, soften it a little bit, because we're talking about our patriarchs, the holiest of men, that what appears to be that they pushed her too harshly rather than perhaps doing it in a more loving way. And as a result, the Medrash tells us she developed such a hate that that she gave birth to Amalek, and Amalek became the arch nemesis, the greatest hater, the Bible tells us, of the Jewish people for all of history. Tradition has it that the Romans are descendants of Amalek, that we know, but tradition has it that Hitler was a descendant of Amalek. And interestingly enough, she advised her son that which Hitler, Yamach Shemo, may his memory be erased, records in Mein Kampf. She advised her son that after that you should preserve and keep the hatred and that deep-rooted hatred against the Jewish people for all of life, and pass it on to your children. Where did that hatred come from? Because she actually had a love, but she was rejected. When there's a love and there's a draw, and that draw is not being satisfied, and even more so, it's being rejected, it actually creates a hate and resentment that is as destructive and harmful as can be. As I said in the beginning, hate and love are interrelated in our physical brain. There's a story told talking about hate and love. There's a story told about a Jew. His name was Vider, was his last name. In the early 20th century, his name was Vider. I do not recall right now his first name. His name was Vider. We'll call him Mr. Vider. He was a child prodigy. He was what we call, in the language of the Talmudic or Yeshiva language, he was an Ilui. He was a child prodigy. At 17, when he turned 17, the city that he lived in needed a rabbi. Either the rabbi passed away or retired, whatever it might be. And he felt, based on his tremendous scholarship and so on, and genius, he felt that he's the right guy for the job. And he approached the leaders of the community and he said, I'd like to have the job of being rabbi. But he was a young fellow. He was 17 years old, a little kid. So they ridiculed him. And they said, well, you said, they ridiculed him. They pushed him away. They ridiculed him. He was terribly hurt. He had a healthy ego. He was terribly hurt. He traveled. He left the town. He lived in one of the cities in Romania. He went all the way to Italy, to Rome. And based on his great knowledge and thirst for knowledge and so on, he eventually became a Catholic priest. And not only did he become a priest, but he actually he developed this terrible, again, hatred towards his own people. And in his sermons and so on, he preached hatred, anti-Semitism of his fellow people. This went on for quite a number of years, until a very, very holy Jew by the name of the Skulener Rebbe, who made it a point to search out lost souls, found a way to meet with him and had an impact where he disappeared from Rome and he returned to his roots. to his Jewish roots. He did tshuva, he repented from the depth of his heart, and his mentor and teacher, the Skolender Rebbe, asked him, you know, in all these years, even while you were a priest, a bishop, you went ahead, you still kept the name Vider. You never changed your original Jewish last name, where many others would, you know, change their names. So he said something fascinating. He said like this. He says, even at the heyday of my rejection and my rebellion against my people, deep down, I felt a connection which was part of what the struggle I was having, and part of what drove that hatred and that hasata, that ranting and raving against my people. But I kept the name Vider, because Vider in Yiddish means to return, to repeat. I knew in my heart of hearts that one day I will return. But here again, you see what resentment, the opposite of love, can bring a person to. I also want to, there's, by the way, a more modern story. There's a more, not more modern than the Vider story, more modern than the Alifa story. There's a story told of the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim, also a great Jewish leader in his time, once called in a teacher. There was a teacher in the cheder that was very, very harsh and strict with the students. I'm assuming that we all remember teachers. I mean, today with a lot of the protections that are in education, but when we were kids, it it wasn't uncommon that the teacher took the kanchik. If you know what a kanchik is, let us know. A kanchik was like the little sort of stick or ruler that the teacher had, and you'd get as a good whack, a good schmeiss on your hands. There was a teacher like that in the school that I grew up who was a little excessive, and he was eventually fired because he was a little excessive in his beatings. But then it was totally, I shouldn't say totally, then it was more acceptable by the sort of the culture and the upbringing of still left over sort of from Eastern Europe. With time, for the better, mostly with time, it has changed, and of course, teachers are not allowed to hit or use physical discipline. But the Chafetz Chaim, now you're talking about Europe, so you can imagine if the Chafetz Chaim felt he needed to address this teacher, who was very strict, that he was strict by those standards. He called him in and he said to him the following. He says, you know that because of you, 1 million Jews are being turned away from their tradition, from their heritage. And the teacher looked up, 1 million Jews, I have I don't know, 20 kids in my classroom. What are you talking about? So he said to him, do you remember a child by the name of Mendele Trotsky? I think at that time his name was not, as a child he had a different name. I think it was Bernstein, I think, or something like that. He says, do you remember that kid? He says, sure, Mendele, he was a wilde chaya, he was a wild, difficult kid. He says, today that's Mr. Trotsky, who is turning away hundreds of thousands or 1 million Jews to communism and away from and becoming atheists and away from their heritage, all because I don't want to be, I want to try to be accurate. He says, treating one child with such harshness breeds a Mendele Trotsky. So, so here you see love versus hate. The way love and its impact for generations, and hate and its impact for generations. Now it's interesting that love, in Kabbalistically, to switch over into the Kabbalah arena over here, or the mystical arena, Chassidus arena, Ahava, love, is the first of the 7 emotional attributes or characteristics as it's listed in Kabbalistic teachings. You have Ahava or Chesed. Chesed and Ahava are interconnected. You have Chesed, Gebura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. Chesed is the first, because love the connection that you need for any type of hashpa'ah, for any type of communication, of passing on. Love is the most powerful tool that is necessary for that to happen. And that's why love is first in our relationship, in the 7 attributes. However, I must make it something very, very clear, and this is very true for our generations, because just like in everything in life, sometimes, when we try to correct, we overcorrect, whether it's politically, whether it's, the Rambam says, Maimonides says that if you have, let's say, a weakness in a certain character, let's say you're too arrogant, you're too harsh, you're too giving even. So the Rambam says for a while you should overcorrect so that eventually you can get to the middle, which is the best way to go. That's what Maimonides writes. So, in going too far with love, which is an absolute necessary ingredient, especially for our generation, we could make the mistake of confusing love with spoiling. Lefanek, to just give our kids whatever they want. That's not true love. Sometimes, and one of the ways to define and to determine whether you're loving or you're spoiling is, why are you doing this for your kid? Are you doing this for your kid because you love them, or you're doing this for your kid because you want them to love you? You're afraid of losing their love. If you're doing it because you're afraid of losing their love, then you have to ask yourself if what you're doing is the right thing. So, in today's day and age, I just saw today, I received a WhatsApp. Things go around the WhatsApp. And this is just interesting because I was thinking about this class and I received it this morning. So this was somewhat apropos. A WhatsApp, and I'm going to read it over here, that I got this morning. And I'm going to say lahavdil, to separate from the Torah concepts that we've been sharing, with a statement from the founder of Dubai, Sheikh Rashid. I don't know him. I don't know who he is, but the Talmud says, Kabel et ha'emet memishamrei, accept the truth from whoever says it. So I don't know if he's a good guy, not a good guy. I'm going to assume, that he's a good fellow. You have to first look at someone positively, unless innocent until proven guilty. Was asked about the future of his country, and he replied the following. Listen to this, because it's simple but insightful. My grandfather rode a camel. My father rode a camel. I ride a Mercedes. My son rides a Land Rover, and my grandson is going to ride a camel again. Why is that? He was asked. Why would his grandson ride a camel? We seem to be progressing here from camel to Mercedes to Land Rover. So he said like this. His reply was, hard times create strong men. Create easy times. I'm sorry, let me start again. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men. Weak men create difficult times. Many will not understand it, but you have to raise warriors, not parasites. And then he says a couple of other things, and he says like this. The Western world has reached a place, I'm somewhat paraphrasing. He says, we are now past the Mercedes and Land Rover years. The camels are on the horizon. The greatest generation consisted of 18-year-old kids storming the beaches at Normandy. And now, 2 generations later, some 18-year-old kids, not all, want to hide in safe rooms when they hear words that hurt their feelings. They also want free stuff because they think they are entitled to it. The camels are on the horizon for sure. This is something that Sheikh of Dubai, Sheikh Rashid, said. Now, there's a lot of truth to that. Now, what is the future of this country? What is the future of the Western world? Only Hashem knows. Sometimes there's a pendulum swing like this, pendulum swing like that, and hopefully, with God's help, the pendulum swing happens all within a sort of a healthy, or within a non-violent environment, etc., etc. So spoiling your child is not true love, not at all. And therefore, and love also has to be healthy. So I want to just read over here for a moment, bear with me over here, from Rabbi Simon Jacobson's book on Sfirat HaOmer. He has a wonderful book on the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer, where we count 49 days, where each of the 49 days we try to refine another attribute of our 7 emotional characteristics. And here he talks about love, chesed, and he says on the first day we have to ask ourselves, is our love sort of healthy and proper? Because true love means that you give love and you're also willing to accept love. Okay? Because as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, Ava, it means Ova. Ova means to have a yearning of two things to become one. So here, let me give you a list of questions for us to think about as we come to the conclusion of this class. He says, examine the love aspect of love, the expression of love and its level of intensity. Everyone has the capacity to love in their hearts. The question is if and how we actualize and express it. Ask yourself. And here he lists a number of questions. What is my capacity to love another person? Some people struggle with that. Some people have a very, very hard time showing their love, even to their own children. Now, plenty of stories about that. Of course, to their students. It is critical that you have love. For every productive, proper relationship, there has to be love. Question number 2. Do I have problems with giving? Giving is sort of the actual result of the love that you might have. Question number 3. These are all somewhat interrelated, just angles. Am I stingy or selfish? And on the selfish part, I could be loving, but I'm not really loving. I'm just loving myself, and I'm using you as a way for my needs to be satisfied. Is it difficult for me to let someone else into my life? This is also an aspect of love. Do I have room for someone else? Do I have room for someone else? Do I allow room for someone else? 2 nuances over here. Am I afraid of my vulnerability of opening up and getting hurt? This is all assessing the love aspect of my love. How do I express love? You can write this all down and think about these things. Am I able to communicate my true feelings? Do I withhold expressing love out of fear of reaction? Or on the contrary, I often express too much too early. Do others misunderstand my intentions? Let's go a little further over here, okay? Because these are good questions to think about. Whom do I love? That's an important question. While love is such a critical ingredient of our personality and way of reaching out for the healthy benefit both of ourselves and of course those around us, often we make a critical mistake of giving love where we shouldn't be giving it. So the question is, whom do I love? Also, another part of this question is, do I only love those that I relate to and who relate to me? Can I have a love that goes broader than myself or the extension of myself? Do I have the capacity to love a stranger? To lend a helping hand to someone I don't know? You know, I often, when I try to, my kids know this, when I inquire for a prospective match for my children, one of the questions I ask, because you want someone that your child marries, you want them to be kind. That's one of the critical qualities you want in a spouse for your child, that they should be kind. They should be a mensch, they should be kind. In addition, of course, to Jewish values, that you want them to raise another generation of healthy, productive, meaningful Jews. You want them to be mensch, but you want them to be kind. And one of the questions that I would ask when finding out about a girl or a boy is, can they be kind to a stranger? Because if you're only kind to your friends, that's not yet a demonstration of true kindness. Of course you should be kind to your friends, but if you're only kind to your friends, it's a necessary social acceptance element to be kind to your friends. So here's the question. Can I be? Do I express love only when it's comfortable? That's okay. So this is some of the questions that can be answered. I mean, there's the question also is, do I overlove and do I smother my children? Do I smother my loved ones, my friends, with my love? That's not true love. True love is taking the recipient of your love in your account and putting them first. Not that I need to express love and you have to accept it. Smothering a child with love can be very, as we know, harmful as well. That doesn't allow the child to grow, doesn't allow the child to have the space that they need to self-develop, etc. So these are all practical aspects of love. But to get back to the initial conversation, initial discussion of today's class is the power of love, which is the first of the attributes, is something that we always have to take into account in our interactions with others. Eliphaz, because was given love, spared Yaakov, and as a result, we as a nation were born, or are here today. Timnah, because she was rejected, can be traced as the origin of almost all enemies of Israel throughout history. Keep that in mind every single time you interact with another fellow human being, especially with a child, especially with a student. Everybody have a fantastic day. We're coming up with Hanukkah. Before Hanukkah, I will say Lahavdil, because it's not a Jewish holiday. We have Thanksgiving here at Chabad. Next Sunday morning, we will have a distribution of coupons to help you with Thanksgiving expenses. We will also most likely have some kosher turkeys available. So I know kosher turkeys, and there's a real shortage. It's really expensive. And we're doing what we can to get either subsidized or even some giveaways for those who can't afford. So stay tuned to that. If you want to help with this project, you want to sponsor some turkeys that we're giving away, or some of the coupons, we would be greatly appreciated, and a wonderful mitzvah. Have a fantastic week. Please share these words of Torah. All the best.